viva Palestina! Free, free Gaza! Free, free Gaza! Free, free Gaza! Free, free Gaza! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina!
سيداتي سادتي أعزائي المشاهدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. مرحبا بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج قضايا وآراء. ضيوفي في حلقة اليوم هما من زعماء ومنظمي الحملة العالمية لكسر الحصار المفروض على غزة ومسيرة غزة الحرة التي اجتمع لأجلها الآلاف من حول العالم في القاهرة مؤخرا أملا في السير إلى غزة، تعبيرا عن التضامن الشعبي العالمي مع أهالي القطاع، وتنديدا بالحصار الجائر المفروض منذ 3 سنوات، وإحياء للذكرى السنوية الأولى للمحرقة التي ارتكبتها القوات الإسرائيلية ضد أهالي القطاع المكلوم، غير أن عوائق عديدة منعتهم من تحقيق ما أرادوا سنتحدث عنها في حلقة اليوم. معنا في الاستوديو الصحفية البريطانية المشهورة والمناضلة لأجل حقوق الفلسطينيين إيفون ريدلي، ومعنا كذلك ميك نابير رئيس حملة التضامن مع فلسطين الاسكتلندية، وكلاهما كان له دور مميز في صياغة وإطلاق وثيقة إعلان القاهرة الأخير، والذي سنتناوله أيضا في حوارنا إن شاء الله. Yvonne, Mick, thank you very much for joining us today. And if I may start with you, Yvonne, this Free Gaza March that took place in Cairo, if you can give us a little bit of background information as to what was the thinking behind it, when the preparations started, how you managed to get more than 1,400 people from around the world to come to Cairo. I mean, what was the whole idea? What did you want to achieve?
Well, there was an eclectic group of organisations that came together when it was announced by an American organisation called Code Pink that they were going to go to Gaza at the end of December. There was going to be a march in Gaza, and it was to draw international attention onto the plight of the people, the siege, and to show solidarity with the people of Gaza. And what happened? The rallying call attracted more than 1,400 peace activists representing 43 different nationalities, and they descended on Cairo expecting then to jump onto buses which would take them to the Rafah border and on into Gaza. That was the plan. It was well documented. It transpired later that some of the key organisers had been in negotiations with the Egyptian government through the Foreign Office for 4 weeks in advance. So it wasn't a surprise by any means that these 1,400 people were arriving.
But the mere concept of getting 1,400 people from around the world, from, as you said, 43 countries or 43 nationalities to come at one particular time, that's a fair campaign. Mick, you come from Scotland, and you're the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign up there. What was your take on this particular campaign? Was it something that you thought was useful? Was it something that you thought would achieve the aims that you as an organisation you want to achieve? What was your take on it?
For us, it was an initiative that could mobilise people outside Palestine in support of the Palestinian struggle. We've noticed over the last year that although support for Israel has been atrophying and drying up over several years, according to all sorts of indicators, the Gaza massacres just over a year ago really had a shattering effect on any residual Israeli support in society as a whole. But the crimes nonetheless continue, the siege continues, and we think there's a huge discrepancy between the way that Western governments are supporting the Israelis in their siege and the fact that there's very, very little domestic support for that policy. So I think that the Viva Palestina initiative, which was fantastic, and also the Gaza Freedom March are two sides, or two parts to the same process, which indicate that large numbers of people are now prepared to do something. I mean, I come from Scotland, where the Scottish Trade Union Congress has committed actively to boycott across-the-board boycott of Israel. So have the Irish and so have the South Africans. There's so many straws in the wind that say people who used to support Israel have gone quiet. People who were uneasy about what's happening have been moved towards doing something. And those people who previously wanted to do something are becoming really angry and more motivated than before. And I think that's what brought 1,400 people to the streets of Cairo.
I mean, I think that it's important to note that these 1,400 people, most if not all, actually came out of their own pockets. And, you know, they got on flights to Cairo out of their own pockets. They spent time away from work, from home, from families during the holiday season, and they stayed at hotels or lodgings or whatever in Cairo in hope to go to Gaza, obviously, all out of their own pockets. So it's by no stretch of the imagination a mean feat. It's quite...
No, but I think a lot of the drive also came from the lack of political will of leaders. And leaders throughout the West have shown no support towards the people of Gaza.
So you think it was born out of a sense of frustration?
I think a lot of it is. And when the people start to lead, that's when the leaders become either irrelevant or the leaders then start to follow. And I think what we're seeing over Gaza and Palestine in particular is that people are taking the initiative because they've had 60 years of promises from political leaders who've delivered absolutely nothing. You know, in fact, if anything, the situation of the Palestinians has got much, much worse. And so ordinary people now are beginning to realise we can't rely on them. We will do our own things, and we will take the initiative, and we will set the agenda. And that's why I think a lot of those people came together, because they were so disenchanted by their own political leaders.
Do you sense, and this question has come through time and time again, do you sense that now there is a sort of realization amongst organizations such as yours and, you know, throughout the world supporting Palestine, that when they come to Cairo, when they converge on Cairo in the manner that they did, it ceases in a sense to become a humanitarian campaign and becomes very much a political one? Do you think that there is a realization of that?
I think that's a fair assessment. People certainly in all the groups that we met were very politically active and very politically aware and very politically involved.
There's been a tremendous frustration at the inability to prevent the invasion of Iraq, the inability to prevent the invasion of Afghanistan. And now here we see a government which is so militantly in support of Israel that even when British citizens on boats in international waters are kidnapped, abducted to Israel, the British government seems to condone this behaviour by the State of Israel. That we see such a complicity by this government in what Israel is doing. But on the other hand, we see Sylvie Lipney having to call off her trip to Britain because she's afraid of because an arrest warrant was issued by a Westminster magistrate, a Jewish guy, I believe. And we see other IDF soldiers afraid to come here and also afraid to go elsewhere because they're afraid of arrest. So I think Palestine's becoming a domestic issue. And when Miliband says, I mean, when he apologises to Lieberman and says, I'll change British law to make sure that war criminals can come here unmolested, something happens in Britain, and I think it's becoming a domestic issue. There's a bit of frustration, and the successful Viva Palestina mobilisation and the successful Gaza Freedom March mobilisation tapped into that feeling. And I don't think that feeling is going to become any less in the years to come.
So what's happened in Cairo? When did you get there, and what was the plan?
Well, most of us arrived over the Christmas period. And the plan was very simple, which was the plan all along the way, to jump on some buses which had been paid for in advance, hired in advance, and you know, there was a lot of planning and preparation had gone into this, and to go in buses down to the Rafah border and over into Gaza. Some people had humanitarian aid in various forms, and on New Year's Day we were to have marched in solidarity with the Palestinian people to the Erez crossing, where we would have challenged, just by being there, the authority of the Israeli snipers who so often put Palestinian people in their crosshairs and think nothing about pulling the trigger.
Let me ask you this. Let me be very, very blunt. I mean, what you've just described, you arriving into Cairo, hundreds of people from all around the world, then jumping on buses and just basically strolling through to... I mean, doesn't that show a little bit of naivety on your part? I mean, is that really a plan? What was...
It was planned well in advance, and it was organised. It transpired that the Code Pink people who were organising the logistics had been there for a month to work out the...
A month prior to your arrival?
Yes, so it wasn't just a bunch of angry activists turning up willy-nilly and saying, oh, let's go off to Gaza. And, you know, this is, it doesn't matter how the Egyptian government wants to portray this. They knew our plans. They had a list of all the people who were part of this project.
Because obviously you have to register beforehand. You have to show your intent.
Everything was registered well in advance. There was even a cut-off date in which people paid a few $100s in advance just to secure the buses that had to be hired to move all these people down. It wasn't some, you know, pop festival event where people just gather in and more people join in. It was well planned in advance.
I mean, and as far from being naive, the Egyptian regime in the past has had to make concessions to its own popular opinion. I mean, the chances of going in through the Israeli checkpoint are absolutely nil.
Yes.
The great majority of the Israeli population supported the massacre and continues to support the massacre in Gaza. In Egypt, it's entirely the opposite. And the regime in the past has felt that it should allow substantial numbers of people to go into Gaza. In fact, while we were there, they announced the border was going to be open for 3 or 4 days shortly after the time that we had asked. So it wasn't at all unrealistic to expect to go there. And the idea of working in partnership with civil society and the government and the authority in Gaza is something that's really important. And our intention was to work with people in Gaza to march towards the Israeli checkpoint at Erez, to march on the Israeli guns, where Palestinians would be shot without compunction. Yes. Westerners, even, I mean, Oliver Stone, the famous film director, was endorsing this march. Various other, you know, the musician Roger Waters did as well. I don't think they would have been in the front line of the march, but the fact that there's that celebrity endorsement means that the Israelis would keep their finger off the trigger finger. That was the plan. However, when we got to Gaza, all bets were off. And we
Cairo.
So I apologise, to Cairo. Yes. We were not allowed to proceed to Gaza. The Egyptian regime reneged on the understanding. And
before I come to that, can I ask, was there any kind of coordination with local Egyptian groups?
No, because...
That's deliberate?
That was deliberate. I personally would have taken a different tack, but the main organisers of getting 42 delegations from different countries into Cairo, a Tower of Babel, they agreed with the Egyptian regime as part of the price for getting into Gaza that they would not be building links with the Egyptian opposition, with Egyptian civil society.
And we didn't intend to be there long enough to make any sort of contacts. You know, we were merely arriving in Cairo, paying our visas. You know, we were all issued with visas by the authorities, and then jumping on these buses and going to Gaza.
Did you try to inform, let's say, the British authorities, the Foreign Office, the British Embassy or Consulate in Cairo of your movements?
I wrote to my MP and said I wanted him to write to the British Foreign Office to get assurances that I wouldn't end up in the crosshairs of an Israeli sniper. because I was making a documentary, and I said Israel has a previous record of shooting documentary makers. And the letter that came back basically couldn't give those assurances.
From your MP?
My MP did write to them, and Ivan Lewis from the Foreign Office wrote back and advised me not to go. That's the solution. Do not go to Gaza.
Well, isn't that in a sense an admission that we can't stop the Israelis from actually shooting a document maker?
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to what's happened in Cairo. Of course, now we realise that the welcome that you got in Cairo was totally different from what you had in mind. What was it exactly that you found when you stepped off your planes?
Well, as Yvonne says, we'd expected to go to Gaza, have a few falafels, stay there overnight and head straight up to Gaza. We'd made no plans whatsoever. So you find yourself in a situation for which you had made no plans. People begin to arrive from different countries, not just different languages and different nationalities, but with some different perspectives.
Yes.
Some were there as peace activists, some were there in active solidarity with every type of resistance in Gaza. And then we had to respond to the situation that we were there. And what happened was quite remarkable. Under conditions of severe, severe limits on human rights, the ability to meet, the ability to travel around a police tail, delegations managed to meet, to discuss, and to work out a plan of action for our enforced stay in Cairo. To nonetheless show to the people of Gaza that we were in solidarity with them, to demonstrate on the streets of Cairo, to appeal to the people of Egypt and Cairo over the heads of their government. And what happened was remarkable. We were everywhere we went for a demonstration was saturated by many hundreds of Egyptian security forces, but the ordinary people of Cairo indicated in many different ways their sympathy with what we were standing for, the sympathy with the people of Gaza.
Did you get that feeling?
Oh, absolutely. I was sitting in a small coffee house just off Midan Talat Harb, and a man was listening very intently, and I said to him with my rudimentary Arabic, "Inta shorta," and he laughed and said, "No, that guy went away that afternoon and made us 2 large banners saying end Gaza genocide in English and in Arabic." And people who were given an opportunity and felt they could supported us. There are other stories like that. I mean,
even the coffee shop owners came under pressure, because if we gathered in groups of more than 6, we apparently were breaking the law. And coffee shop owners were coming under pressure not to serve us, to close rather than allow us in. Hotel owners were coming under the same sort of pressure.
I mean, I think that it's important for our audiences to understand what we're talking about here. When you say, I mean, it sounds like you were tagged. I mean, Cairo is a fairly busy and fairly vast place.
Enormous.
Can't you just, get on a bus and go towards the border? I mean, this is something that maybe most viewers won't understand. What was the map like?
Why were you restricted? My eyes opened to what it's like living in a police state. Every time I left my hotel, which was a 5-star hotel overlooking the Nile, every time I left there and jumped into a taxi with my cameraman, the taxi would take us in completely the opposite direction to where we wanted to go. We were unable to get any of the taxis from around the hotel because they were under instructions from the regime not to allow us to go to the places that we needed to go. So that in itself was difficult. There were about half a dozen plainclothes policemen sitting in the hotel lobby, and every time I came downstairs and moved, they moved as well. And of course there's no pretense about who and what they are. Other people had this as well. I think
people in the Lotus Hotel the night before a demonstration found a row of police outside the hotel, preventing them from leaving the hotel and moving on to the streets of Cairo. So the police blockaded them in their hotel and everybody else in the hotel as well. The numerous examples of venues which had been booked in advance, saying that they were really too afraid to continue because security had been in touch and told them to cancel the booking. It was very difficult to meet, to organise, to discuss. And I don't know how they feel in the hotel where we did have a huge meeting of several hundred people milling up and down the stairwell, people speaking round corners, because that was the best that we could achieve. But it was a throng that just suddenly materialised despite all the efforts of the regime to prevent us getting together. Did discuss, did plan, and then did have a demonstration in Tahrir Square.
Were there any direct talks between you and either the security or the government? Were there any discussions about what was going on and how this could be resolved?
Well, other than the Code Pink group and their regular meetings with the Foreign Ministry, no.
Was it a given that and understood that Code Pink were leading the negotiations on this?
Well, the thing is, Code Pink weren't. I mean, Code Pink had been the rallying point for all these different groups that had registered through Code Pink. But, you know, these groups, as Mick said, had different ideas and different tactics. And so really the Egyptian government was talking to a small group of people who weren't really, with the best will in the world, reflecting the intentions or the feelings of the scores and scores of other groups who were there.
What was the? I mean, when you, I think it's quite safe to say that when you express your frustration to those who were speaking to the government or the authorities on your behalf, what was their feeling? What was the response that they were getting from the Egyptians? Why was this happening? Why weren't you just allowed to just leave Egypt?
It dawned on us day after day after day that this wasn't a rerun of what the Egyptians have always done in the past. That is to say, no, 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 you're not getting in, okay, you can go in. This has always been the case in the past, and this was what we thought might happen again. But it slowly dawned on us the Egyptians were not letting us in. They were maintaining their part of the siege of Gaza in collaboration with the Israelis, and that we were going to have to become a thorn in their sides in Cairo in order to make it more awkward for them to allow us to stay in Cairo, and they might just be prepared to allow us to go to Gaza. That was the calculus. In the event, we did not succeed, but I think some other very significant events took place in Cairo because of that.
Listening to a number of your fellow activists who were on the streets of Cairo, the message was that most of those people, for the very first time in that particular region, you know, many have, you know, had stepped foot on, you know, in the Middle East for the very first time because of this particular campaign and to take part in this march. The message that they got and they were trying to get through was that they felt, after all this intimidation, harassment and blockade, that Egypt was actively trying to stop all attempts to break the siege on Gaza. Do you think that that is a fair reflection of the overall sentiment of those who took part in the march in Cairo?
I think that it became quite clear that Egypt was enforcing the siege with as much passion and vigour and enthusiasm as Israel. And I think people were quite shocked by that. Many of us felt maybe we're the sacrificial lambs, maybe this is all to you know, they'll hold us back, but when Viva Palestina, the convoy arrives in Al Arish, they'll say, well, we'll let these go through, but we can't let you in. And so I thought, well, maybe we're just being used by the Egyptian government, but as it transpired over the 10 days or so that we were there, this wasn't the case. The Egyptians weren't bargaining with anybody, and they were not going to let one single person through. To the point where there were 5 or 6 checkpoints put in place between Cairo and Al Arish, and people who tried to sneak on passenger buses, who hired private cars, who went in private cars. Every single vehicle was stopped and searched, and anyone who was remotely connected with the Gaza Freedom Marches was ejected and sent back to Cairo.
Just over a year ago, Anas, I, with 50 other internationals, took a busload of medicines up to Gaza, up the same road, up to El Arish and so on. We never made it because the Egyptians stopped us in the desert and forced us back. Just to make it clear to your readers, probably telling them what they already know, it's a single road and there's lots of checkpoints on there. The Egyptians can control it and can stop anyone getting into Gaza. That's what happened with me. So we knew that the Egyptians were maintaining their role in the siege of Gaza, that they were playing their part in maintaining the killing zone for the Israelis. And we also knew that during the Israeli massacres in last year, Egypt closed the border. They didn't open the border. They didn't have floods of ambulances and military doctors and so on going in to help the people of Gaza. They actually shut them in while the Israelis dropped white phosphorus on them. So we knew the crimes of the regime. Having said that, a lot of the people who went to Cairo already knew about how bestial the Israelis had been. They're very well educated in that. But there was a kind of vagueness about the role of Egypt. Maybe Egypt is trying, maybe the Arab brothers are, just being forced by bad Israel and bad America to do what they don't want to do. We saw very clearly there that the Egyptian regime, very much against the wishes of the overwhelming majority of the Egyptian people, is maintaining the genocidal siege of the people of Gaza on its own behalf.
I'm going to come back to this because I'm extremely interested to understand how this is comprehended by, and if I may say so, a Westerner who realizes that Egypt has this legacy and history and heritage, the wars with Israel and being Arab and being Muslim and the such, and how you understand and how you comprehend this. But we'll come to this after the break. We'll take a short break and come back. أعزائي المشاهدين، لحظات ونعاود وإياكم الحوار، فابقوا معنا.
الحوار، أبعاد لا تنتهي.
مرحبا بكم أعزائي المشاهدين في لقاء الليلة من برنامج قضايا وآراء، ومعنا ضيفي الليلة ميك نابير زعيم حملة التضامن مع فلسطين الاسكتلندية، وكذلك الصحفية البريطانية والناشطة إيفون ريدلي. If I may come and continue the point that we cut off at, and that is, how does a Westerner understand this stand that Egypt seems to be taking, what you felt firsthand, in respect to enforcing a siege on an Arab and Muslim neighboring nation with, Egypt's wonderful and great and undeniable legacy, the wars in trying to free and liberate Arab lands and the such. I mean, how do you explain this to someone who is visiting the region for the first time, who doesn't really know about the intricacies of the situation? How do you understand this?
I was shocked on two levels. There was just no fig leaf of pretense this time. It was blatantly clear that the Egyptian regime was enforcing the siege, as I said before, with as much passion and vigour and enthusiasm as Israel. And that, to me, was shocking. But on a second level, on an Islamic level, and of course, I have all the enthusiasm and zeal of a convert to Islam, I was shaken that, again, that there was no brotherhood. There was no spirit of brotherhood. There was no care, no concern for brothers and sisters in Islam who were going through horrendous suffering in Gaza. And one of our actions, which I'm sure Mick will expand on, resulted in a sit-in in a busy street in Cairo near the Egyptian Museum. And most of the women sat in the front of this protest in the rather mistaken, naive belief that as women, these plainclothes officers and uniformed police are not really going to give us rough treatment. And within minutes, I realised that that was wrong, as I saw several plainclothes policemen punch women in the face, one breaking her nose and breaking her teeth. And then I looked on in absolute horror as some of them began to pull the hijabs off the heads of sisters. And I just couldn't believe this, that there I was watching Muslim men, my brothers, behaving in this sort of way. And if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, Anas, and we had two very brave camera people with me who recorded this, and they thankfully got it out to the wider world. These images were absolutely shocking, and so, as I say, on two levels, it really took me aback.
You know, for a number of days, vigils, demonstrations, clashes, fights, and scuffles in the streets of Cairo. But the Egyptians say that, you know, that there was no need for that, because they actually allowed some buses to leave for Al-Arish, but that offer, that kind gesture from the Egyptian government was turned down.
They lie. For example, with Viva Palestina, rather than allow them to cross about 20 miles of water, they played head games with them and made them retreat back up through the whole length of Jordan, back up through Syria, and then send their trucks by sea down from Syria. It was absolutely ludicrous. They played the same kind of games with us. But they played they played the game of divide and rule, to say that out of 1,400 we will allow 100 to go. To their great credit, all the delegations, pretty much in isolation from each other, reached the same conclusion, that the only thing we can offer the Palestinians and the Gazans in the long term has to be as a result of our solidarity, our ability to organise and hold together, given the collaboration of our regimes. And we're not going to trade. We're not going to fritter away that solidarity by allowing some people to be privileged, because that erodes our ability to deliver in the long term. But what we saw was the determined support of Egypt for the genocidal blockade of Gaza. And Egypt's the second major recipient of US aid on the planet after Israel. That $1.9 billion a year is not given to tidy up Cairo or to improve the education or health of people up and down the Nile. It's there to support an absolutely absurd security apparatus, bloated beyond anyone's expectations.
Well, if they can afford to send a convoy wherever you go, I mean, it's...
Well, one Egyptian said to me, one Egyptian whom I worked with in Edinburgh, he said the rule is 5 to 1. If there's 100 demonstrators in Cairo University, if there's 100, then you have 500 security. And Egyptians seem to know that this is the formula. And it's quite ludicrous that any state can actually do that, that they can multiply the number of demonstrators by 5 and send in that kind of security force. But I think they both report to head office in Washington, from Cairo and from Tel Aviv. They work together. The Israelis wish to remove all Palestinians from Palestine as far as they possibly can. And the Egyptians hate the fact that Palestinians democratically elected an authority, whereas in Egypt we have 30 years of personal dictatorship and possibly the emergence of a new monarchy in the not too distant future. So there's a tension obviously between Israel and Palestine. Israel wants Palestine and not Palestinians, but Egypt sees any democratic rupture, any opening in the Middle East as a threat to its own pretty rotten and widely detested dictatorship. I mean, detested by Egyptians.
What was the response, if any, that you got from the embassies and consulates, the foreign delegations over there? Were you in touch with the British? Were the French in touch with them?
The French, I have to say, I really wished at one stage, you know, that I was French, and my mother will probably never believe that I could say that, but the French, when they had their buses that they had paid for and booked, when they failed to show to take them to Gaza, they immediately went round to their embassy. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they stormed the grounds of the embassy, and Mick's 5-to-1 assessment, you know, thousands of police suddenly arrived, and there was a water cannon, and the French ambassador came out in his pyjamas, and he said to the senior police officer, "Don't you dare harm any of these people. They are my people. You will treat them with respect. And there's no need for all of this," meaning the water cannons. And the French set up this amazing peace camp, the length of the French embassy, and it's a very long embassy. They took up the entire pavement, and for the next 7 days there were wall-to-wall riot squad police in rows of 3, just flanking the entire peace camp. But people were very inspired by the French ambassador. The Americans went straight to their embassy, fired up, and to complain that their buses had been taken. And the message from the American embassy was, if you continue with this action, you will lose your rights as US citizens. The Spanish ambassador, I think, was largely supportive. The Italian ambassador was okay with his people. I just didn't bother going to the British embassy, and Mick didn't either. I mean, you know, it was pointless. But you know, what was interesting when we were talking before about this street violence, when the plainclothes police went in, they actually seemed at one stage to be targeting the Americans. And this really amazed me, because I had always believed until that point, if you had an American passport, you were untouchable. Yeah. You know, it's the superpower. But something made these plainclothes police in Cairo believe that they could break a few ribs, smash a few faces of Americans, and there would be no comeback whatsoever.
Okay, let's move on from Cairo, although it's something that needs to be told time and time again, because in a sense, as we discussed, parts of it is, you know, is beyond belief almost. But
well, let's face it, this will be one of the few TV stations that shows the images of that violence, because the press censorship in Egypt is shocking. Well,
it is quite remarkable that something as seismic as this, you know, 1,400 foreigners in one of the most important capitals of the Arab and Muslim world, for a period of a week or 10 days with this kind of activity, and yet there was virtually no mention of it in most media sources, whether foreign or Arab, and I think that, you know, that in itself is quite telling.
Can I just add one caveat?
Of course.
Anas? The police were thuggish, there's no question about it. And Kerry, I don't have enough hair to be dragged across the street by my hair, and it must be a very unpleasant experience. But put this in perspective, nasty though that is, I believe they were relatively restrained. I think there was a demonstration at one of the Cairo universities later the same afternoon as we were in Tahrir Square, and I believe it was put down with considerable clubbing. So Egyptians get it much, much, much worse. And I've been on demonstrations in the West Bank and Palestine. Israelis there use live ammunition, kill foreigners from time to time. So in the scale of things, it was thuggish, but it's a quantum leap up to what Egyptians get in Cairo, and a further quantum leap up to what Israelis dispense. They're in a league of their own.
What's going to happen next? Cairo has, as a result of your efforts and as a result of the Viva Palestina scuffles and clashes that took place, has decided that it will allow no more convoys through to Gaza. Many will argue that it's your fault. You have now contributed towards the total blockade of any form of aid to Gaza. In fact, some have already spoken about how the troubles that you have caused in Cairo and on the way, in the case of Viva Palestina, to Gaza, you have contributed to the people of Gaza suffering even more. What would your response be to that?
I have 5,000 Facebook friends, and I can tell you that a lot of them are from Palestine and quite a few from Gaza. Not one has said that to me. I have heard that comment. I've heard that comment from those useless politicians who've delivered nothing over 60 years. I've heard those comments from the foreign minister of Egypt, a man who I wouldn't put in charge of a cabbage patch. And I've heard those comments from the Zionist lobby, and in particular in Tel Aviv. So those comments come as no surprise. What it has done, what they have done, they have fired up 1,400 peace activists who have gone out and fired up their communities. And if we can't break the siege in Egypt, we'll break it another way. And already the plans have been announced for a flotilla of boats to sail into Gaza. All they have done is make us more determined and put an even bigger spotlight on the brutality of this siege. Now, the only way to stop people like me and him being a pain in their side is open up Rafah, lift the siege, end the blockade, and start treating those people in Gaza like fellow human beings.
You know, the argument that we've caused some trouble and brought something on our heads, first of all, this is not about us, it's about genocide against the people of Gaza and mass killing. But it reminds me, you know, the old joke about the two guys in front of the firing squad, and one says, shall we ask for a blindfold? And the other one says, don't cause any trouble. And I think the people of Gaza are faced with being disappeared as quickly as the Israelis can achieve. They're organising and planning the next wave of mass killings for sure, even as we speak. So we've no choice but to escalate and to intensify solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I think there's a standard formula, all too often revealed in failure. But the stronger the campaign of solidarity in the, if I can say, the imperial countries with the people who are invaded and attacked and violated, then the greater the barrier to even greater killings by our state. I mean, America, for example, toyed with the idea of atom bombs on the people of Vietnam. Johnson said he was afraid, really afraid that 1 million American students would scale the walls of the White House if he did that and lynch their president. So even though it was horrific, there was some barrier set to what the state could do by their fear of their domestic populations. Now, a couple of million of us demonstrated against the war of, the invasion and devastation of Iraq. We didn't succeed in preventing it, but they're still a bit afraid of us, and I think we have to intensify that fear. We have to show that we are prepared to build a massive campaign of boycott, divestment and sanctions against the state of Israel, and that we know the complicity of our governments.
I mean, you mentioned, Mick, you mentioned at the very top of the programme, you mentioned that the reputation of Israel is slowly becoming, eroded even in the minds of those who didn't know better in the past. You mentioned the issue of the warrants against the likes of Livni and Barak, and that are now being regularly produced, so that now the Israeli leaders are deterred from even thinking of visiting the UK. Can you actually sense a real shift in not only just the perception of the conflict, of the situation, but also the attitude in terms of activism and in terms of realizing what needs to be done? Can you see that, or is this just something that is just unfortunate? It's there, we can't really do much about it, we will show up for a demonstration on a good day, but really do little else?
As I say, 1,400 peace activists have been fired up now to go, and all still determined to go to Gaza. And one of them has tried 3 times now to get into Gaza, and she is called Hedy Epstein, and she is a Holocaust survivor.
So she's Jewish?
Jewish, 85 years old, was given a chance after fleeing the Holocaust, and her parents died in Auschwitz. She had a chance to go for what was being billed as a better life in Israel. And she said all those years ago that Zionism was repugnant and there was no way that she would do that. She's a remarkable woman. She's partially deaf through Israeli sound bombs that have been thrown at her during her activism in the West Bank. And she told me that
she was with you in Cairo?
She was with me in Cairo. We were following her around. We're making a film about her life. And she told me that when she sees these little Palestinian children running around in the streets, she remembers the days of her persecution when she was brought up in Freiburg in Germany, and she was called a filthy Jew. And the name calling and the persecution. And she said, you know, I can see little Hedy Epsteins on the streets in Palestine, and it's wrong. Now, she is determined to go to Gaza, and she's a great rallying call, she's a great inspiration. And when you start to get Holocaust victims coming out and saying Israel is repugnant, Zionism is repugnant, it's very, very powerful. I do a lot of talking on university campuses in America, and young Jewish people who would have once gone off to settle in Israel no longer want to. They feel uncomfortable about the whole thing. They listen to people like Hedy Epstein, and just the desire to go and build this state is no longer there. But what is interesting is they are losing that inclination to go and build on the Zionist state. The growth of young Palestinians who want to return is increasing all the time. And as that balance is tipping, so is the support. As Mick said, the support is growing all the time.
There are numerous examples on us. I mean, a couple of years ago, we got Glasgow City Council to agree to support a campaign for a particular Israeli prisoner who'd done 18 years in prison. The Jewish Chronicle, which is really run by Zionists here in Britain, howled with fury because nobody, not because they'd passed the motion unanimously, but nobody in Glasgow City Council among the councillors had defended Israel with even one word. Now, 20 years ago, they would have been jumping up one after the other, as they still are in Parliament. I witnessed with my own eyes the same thing in Edinburgh City Council, where you would expect opposition. There is none. I mean, there's cravenness, there's cowardice, there's pusillanimity, there's careerism, there's indifference to savagery, but there's no organised and serious defence of Zionism. It doesn't happen. And the Zionists, if you look at their internal discussions, if you like, are deeply worried about this. Can I just say that the Israeli consulate in New York really said that young Jews are displaying less interest, the demographic in America that they can appeal to is constricting, and guess where they decided to place their advertising? Soft porn magazines. That was the strategy. Now, when you're not looking at university professors, you're not looking at the higher echelons of American society. When you put your money in soft porn magazines, then it's a little bit like in Britain, where the BNP leader got on BBC and took the opportunity to express his militant support for Israel's massacres in Gaza last year. So by their friends shall ye know them, and also by the people they wish to make their friends will we know them as well. And there's a profound crisis among Zionists. It may be small consolation to the people of Gaza in the short term, but I think the scales are tipping. The Palestinians are paying a huge price in terms of suffering and pain, but if it's any consolation, Israel has already lost the battle for public opinion worldwide. How many people know that Israeli ships can no longer enter Durban port in South Africa? They're turned away by the dockers there who refuse to handle any Israeli cargo. South Africa today, other places tomorrow.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes to go, and I want to know exactly what the next steps are. What do you have in the pipelines? What are you planning for?
Well, I've mentioned the ships that are going to sail to Gaza, inshallah, in the spring. But before we left Cairo, Mick, myself and a large number of others took out a class action to sue the Egyptian government over this wall that has been built in Rafah to try and have the wall stopped. And we had a lot of running round to do, but we did it in the end. We got the power of attorney and handed that over to Egyptian lawyers. So that's a little time bomb we've left ticking in Cairo. But I think the biggest achievement would be the South African delegation's Cairo Declaration.
You know, large numbers of political prisoners in prisons become a university over many, many years. But this was a tiny, tiny thing, but the Egyptian authorities kept us penned up in the city of Cairo for 5 or 6 days. They're going to regret it, because during those 5 or 6 days, fantastic discussion took place. The effort to bring 42 national delegations together, burning with fury at what Israel's doing, and able to meet physically, face to face, agree, discuss, disagree, thrash things out.
Would have otherwise cost you millions.
It couldn't be done. It happened thanks to the Egyptian government. That was not their wish, but they penned us in together, and really creative things started to happen. The South Africans, I think, will look back on Cairo and say, in Cairo, the South Africans passed the baton of a massive, successful anti-apartheid movement, a worldwide movement against the horrors of apartheid in South Africa. They passed that baton on to a new movement that's going to develop worldwide against apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide committed by the Israelis. So we're looking to take the example of Tzivi Lipni, Doron Almog, various other Israeli criminals, and bring it down the food chain a little bit. We want any Israeli, because everybody carries a mobile phone, you know, with a camera in it, and even a video camera. They're everywhere. Anybody who's on the site of Israeli crimes in the West Bank or anywhere else should be taking photographs, and we want those photographs posted. We want the few Israelis who are prepared to support us to say who these people are, where they live, what's their address. And I don't think they should be able to go on holiday to Belgium or Spain or Britain without at least the nagging little fear at the back of their mind that handcuffs might be waiting for them at Heathrow Airport, as was the case with Doron Almog. Other pressure points. I mean, in Greek myth, Achilles was invulnerable. His mother held him, I think, upside down, and only one little heel was where he was vulnerable. Israel is almost invulnerable, but it isn't. It's got Achilles heels, and we're going to find those Achilles heels. We're going to find where we are strong and they are weak, and we ask Arabs and people around the world to join together, because together we can make a difference. I don't think the situation's hopeless. I think for the Zionists, they can see a biblical phrase, the writing on the wall.
For anyone who wants to see or to read the Cairo Declaration, where do they go?
They go to many places, Anas. Our small website, the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign website, we have it on the homepage. We want people all over the world, every individual but also institutions, to sign up to this declaration, because the Palestinians from inside the prison have made their wish very, very clear. This is a voice from outside the prison in active, unbreakable solidarity with the people of Palestine, and we want to take their voice, amplify it, and build a campaign.
Mick Napier, Yvonne Ridley, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
وشكرا سيداتي سادتي لمتابعتكم، وحتى نلقاكم في حلقة جديدة من قضايا وآراء. لكم مني أنس التكريتي وفريق البرنامج أطيب المنى، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.